The galaxy was a scared battlefield, where the remnants of once proud civilizations now limped along, consumed by a war that had lasted for centuries. The Zorathi Empire, a race of towering armored warriors, had long dominated through brutal military might and ruthless tactics. They controlled vast sectors of the galaxy, conquering worlds with an iron fist, leaving ashes in their wake. Their enemies, the Vinar Coalition, were a coalition of several species united by their advanced technology and shared desire for peace. But peace was a distant dream, lost to the chaos of endless warfare. The war between the two factions had reached a deadly stalemate. Both sides had spent decades fighting each other to exhaustion, with no decisive victory in sight. The Zorathi's overwhelming numbers and their advanced, fearsome war machines were met by the Vinar's superior technological prowess. Ships that could phase in and out of space, weapons that could tear planets apart, and shields that could withstand anything the Zorathi threw at them. Yet every advance was countered, and every victory came with unbearable losses. At the heart of the galaxy, both sides were readying their final campaigns. The Zorathi had mobilized their last great armada, a fleet that stretched across dozens of star systems, prepared for an all-out assault on the Vinar homeworld. The Vinar, not to be outdone, had unveiled their secret weapon, a massive super weapon capable of destroying entire fleets in a single strike. The battle for the galaxy would take place on a scale no one could predict. The outcome was uncertain, but one thing was clear: whichever side won would be the last one standing, but at a cost that would leave the galaxy shattered. As both factions prepared their final moves, tensions reached a boiling point. The commanders of the Zorathi and Vinar armies were not only at war with each other, but also with the idea of losing their civilizations. Desperation had set in. What had once been a fight for control of the galaxy had turned into a war of survival, a fight for the future of their species. The situation was dire. The Zorathi's fleets were scattered across the galaxy, taking heavy losses in raids against Vinar supply lines. The Vinar had resorted to using covert strikes to weaken the Zorathi's infrastructure, but their forces were dwindling. The cost of war had been unimaginable. Entire colonies had been wiped out, and countless billions of lives were lost. Families, entire civilizations, were left to mourn the unthinkable destruction. Yet the war raged on. It was then, in the midst of this darkness, that something impossible happened. Deep in the uncharted space beyond the galactic core, an unknown force appeared. An anomaly that no one could explain. It was a blip on the radar at first, a small disturbance, but it quickly grew into something that none of the war-weary commanders could ignore. Something was coming, fast, and it wasn't like anything either faction had encountered before. As the anomaly drew closer to the war zone, both the Zorathi and Vinar forces halted their preparations. In their final moments of confrontation, they turned their attention to the strange new arrival. This was no ordinary ship, no unfamiliar ally. The ships that entered the battlefield were small, almost crude in design compared to the grand fleets of the Zorathi or the sleek, advanced ships of the Vinar. Yet there was something unsettling about them, a presence that felt undeniable. The last battle was about to begin. But what neither side realized was that this new force would not just change the course of the war, it would bring an end to it, and in a way no one could have anticipated. The strange ships appeared without warning, their approach defying all known laws of physics. At first, both the Zorathi and Vinar believed it was a rogue fleet, perhaps a third-party faction, attempting to gain advantage in the war. But as the unknown ships drew closer, it became clear that this was no ordinary arrival. The ships were unlike anything either faction had ever encountered, not just in design, but in their behavior. They seemed to glide effortlessly through the vacuum of space, leaving behind trails of shimmering light that seemed almost too precise to be natural. The Zorathi fleet, at the edge of their sector, was the first to react. They rallied their warships, preparing to engage this unexpected threat. The Vinar, ever cautious and strategic, watched closely, trying to gather any intelligence they could. For a brief moment, both sides hesitated, caught between the unknown and their own deep-rooted animosities. But then, something utterly baffling occurred. The alien ships, despite being outnumbered, made no attempt to engage in traditional combat. Instead, they positioned themselves between the Zorathi and Venair forces, as though to hold the line, not with weapons, but with a presence. And in the cold, silent expanse of space, a single crystalline voice rang out through both fleets' communication channels, as though coming from the very heart of the anomaly itself. "We're here to end this." The transmission was brief, direct, and above all, chilling in its finality. The voice was calm, almost serene, but its words carried the weight of certainty. It wasn't an offer of peace, nor a request for negotiations. It was an announcement. The war, it seemed, was over, not because of some diplomatic resolution, but because someone had decided it would be. For several moments, both the Zorathi and Venair commanders were left in stunned silence. The magnitude of the message wasn't lost on them. Whoever these beings were, they were confident in their power, so much so that they made no demands, no threats, only the statement of their intent. The Zorathi were the first to respond. Their fleet commander, a battle-hardened veteran of countless conflicts, snarled over the comms, demanding to know who dared to interfere in their war. They threatened retaliation, promising the full might of their armada. The Venair, equally skeptical, tried to analyze the ship's technology, sending probes to gather data, but every attempt was met with a quiet, unnerving resistance. It was as if the ships were aware of every move before it was made. The voice came again, softer this time, but still unmistakably authoritative. "We do not wish to fight you. We do not wish to rule you. We only seek to stop this." The implication was clear. There would be no negotiations, no alliances. The humans, as they identified themselves, had no interest in the politics of war or the balance of power. They were here to end the war, and they would do so on their terms, whether the Zorathi and Venair liked it or not. Fear rippled through both fleets. The Zorathi, who had once believed they could crush any foe under their heel, now faced an unknown adversary whose very presence felt like a threat they could not understand. The Venair, masters of technology, suddenly found themselves outmatched by something they could not even comprehend. The stakes of the war had just shifted. The two factions, now united in their uncertainty, prepared for what would come next. But no one, not even the most battle-hardened warriors in the galaxy, could have predicted the storm humanity was about to unleash. The moment the humans made their presence known, both the Zorathi and Venair forces scrambled to adjust. A wave of tension washed over the battlefield as commanders on both sides knew one thing: they had never faced anything like this. The enemy, a fleet of unknown ships that barely registered on their sensors, was not just another power in the galaxy. It was a new, unknowable threat. The Zorathi, always the aggressors, wasted no time. Their fleets moved first, their warships roaring to life, engines burning with the sheer force of their military might. Heavy cruisers, each the size of a small moon, advanced toward the human fleet. Swarms of smaller ships, designed for speed and destruction, scattered to engage the unknown force. Their weapons, devastating lasers and plasma bolts, locked onto the human ships. The human ships, in contrast, did not engage in the same manner. They didn't scatter, didn't break formation. They simply moved. With an elegance and grace that defied the expectations of the battlefield, the human ships slid through space, weaving and shifting in ways that seemed impossible. The Zorathi unleashed their full arsenal, but the human ships didn't even flinch. It was as though the energy blasts were being absorbed into the very fabric of space around them, as if time itself bent to their will. On the Venair side, a different response occurred. Their elite commanders, who had once turned the tide of battles with their advanced technology, began to deploy their most sophisticated weapons. Star-destroying missiles, weapons that could rip apart planets, were launched toward the humans. With a flicker of light, the missiles were intercepted and vaporized before they even reached their target. The Venair, still struggling to understand the tactics of their new adversary, sent their top-tier stealth ships, hoping to gain the advantage. But even those ships, built to phase in and out of space, were hunted down by human vessels that seemed to anticipate every move before it was made. In the midst of the chaos, a chilling realization spread like wildfire across both fleets. The humans were unpredictable, and their technology seemed to defy all known laws of physics. It wasn't just that they were overpowering. It was that their ships moved with an intelligence that wasn't calculated. The humans weren't fighting like soldiers, they were fighting like a single entity. They moved in tandem, a perfect synergy, with each ship knowing instinctively where to be, when to move, and how to strike. Zorathi warships were being reduced to scrap metal in moments. A single human ship, seemingly outnumbered, could take down 5, 6 Zorathi warships at once with only a few bursts of energy. And it wasn't just their advanced weaponry, it was how they used it. The humans didn't simply destroy their enemies, they disabled them. Ships that tried to flee were intercepted with an uncanny precision, their engines frozen or their weapon systems shut down mid-launch. In a panic, the Zorathi fleet commander ordered his flagship, the Dread Revenant, to unleash the last secret weapon in their arsenal, an antimatter bomb that could obliterate an entire solar system. But as the device powered up, the human ships appeared from the shadows, moving faster than any Zorathi had expected. They arrived just in time to disable the bomb, leaving the Zorathi fleet commander in a state of shock. His final trump card had been rendered useless in a matter of seconds. Meanwhile, the Venair were not doing much better. Their own commanders, though technologically brilliant, found themselves outmatched in ways they couldn't explain. They couldn't even track the human ships accurately. Their sensors would ping nothing but empty space. The humans appeared to be everywhere at once. When the Venair attempted to target the humans with their highest precision beams, the human ships would vanish in a blink and reappear somewhere else, striking from an unexpected angle. The chaos reached its peak as the battle unfolded at a blistering pace. The Zorathi and Venair, once confident in their own technological supremacy, were now realizing they were facing something far more advanced, far more ruthless than they had ever expected. And they were helpless in the face of it. Both fleets began to retreat, but the humans pursued relentlessly. Their ships moved through the carnage like shadows, eliminating every threat that remained. The two great powers, so proud of their endless war, were now on the verge of being completely obliterated. And in the distance, the human ships, calm, unyielding, continued to press forward, showing no sign of slowing down. It was clear now. The galaxy had just entered a new era, and the rules had changed forever. The Zorathi and Venair forces, once proud and unyielding, now found themselves scrambling in confusion and fear. The battle, which had begun as a contest of technological might, had turned into a nightmare they couldn't wake from. What had started as a tense standoff between the two galactic powers was now a rout, and both sides realized they were no longer in control of their fates. The first ripple of panic began in the Zorathi command center. Their warriors, trained for generations in combat, began questioning what they were seeing. Zorathi ships, once feared across the galaxy for their immense size and firepower, were reduced to floating wreckage with terrifying efficiency. It wasn't just their ships being destroyed. It was their sense of invincibility, shattered in an instant. The war that had been the centerpiece of their civilization for centuries was now being dismantled by an unknown enemy. Commander Zorak, the head of the Zorathi fleet, watched helplessly as his flagship, Dread Revenant, was hit by a blast of energy from a human ship. The Zorathi dreadnought's shields, which had withstood the full brunt of countless attacks over the years, flickered and failed. The ship shook violently as its systems were systematically disabled. The sense of dread that hung in the air was palpable. They were no longer just fighting for supremacy. They were fighting for their survival. Meanwhile, aboard the Venair flagship, Epsilon Expanse, High Commander Olin was having a similar realization. As the Vanar, known for their precise calculations and advanced tactics, scrambled to analyze the human ships, their technology failed them at every turn. The Vanar relied on their ability to predict and outmaneuver their opponents, but against the humans, their advanced algorithms were useless. Their ships vanished from sensors before they could be tracked, and their weapon systems locked onto empty space. The humans fought like ghosts, attacking from positions that seemed impossible to predict. In the moments after the battle began to shift in favor of the humans, both sides tried to regroup, but the gap between them and their unknown adversary only widened. The Zorathi were the first to send out desperate signals, attempting to form alliances with any faction that might be able to challenge the humans, but their calls for help were met with silence. The Vanar did the same, reaching out to other galactic powers, but none answered. It wasn't just that their enemies were stronger. It was that the humans didn't operate on the same set of rules. The more the Zorathi and Vanar tried to understand, the more they realized they were dealing with something completely outside their experience. The humans' technology wasn't just more advanced, it was fundamentally different. And worse yet, the humans' combat style was something neither the Zorathi nor Vanar could fathom. Across the galaxy, whispers of the new human threat began to spread like wildfire. The once feared powers of the galaxy, who had spent millennia building their empires through bloodshed and conquest, now found themselves trembling in the face of an unrelenting force. News of the humans' devastating efficiency in battle reached every corner of the galaxy, sparking a wave of fear that rippled through every faction. Leaders who had once viewed the war as a political chess game now saw it for what it was, a desperate struggle for survival. The once strong alliances between the Zorathi and Vanar, built through mutual distrust and centuries of bloody conflict, began to crack under the weight of the new threat. The thought that someone had arrived from beyond their understanding, with no clear purpose other than to end the war, left even the most seasoned commanders shaken. The humans' message had been simple: we're here to end this. But the galaxy's ruling powers were beginning to fear that the true message was far darker. We're here to change everything. Even as the Zorathi and Vanar reeled, trying to regroup, the humans made no move to speak again. No threats, no demands. They had already made their intent clear. The galaxy would no longer know war as it had. There was a strange finality in their silence, and with each passing moment, it grew heavier. The Zorathi and Vanar forces, once confident in their ability to destroy each other, now realized they were no longer the center of the galaxy. They were players in a game they hadn't even known was being played. And it was a game they had already lost. The galaxy, once a battleground for the Zorathi and Vanar, now stood on the brink of total upheaval. The previous battles had been a display of overwhelming human power, but the real shock came with the humans' next move. It was not the destruction of enemy fleets or the crumbling of battle stations. It was what they did after the destruction that truly turned the tide. Both the Zorathi and Vanar forces were left in a state of utter disarray, their once formidable military machines reduced to nothing more than broken remnants scattered across space. The remaining Zorathi fleet retreated in panic, their ships disorganized and struggling to maintain any semblance of order. The Vanar, too, were on the defensive, their technological superiority no match for the humans' unpredictability and efficiency. But humanity didn't press the attack. They did something no conqueror had ever done before. They stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. For hours, there was nothing but the drifting wreckage of the two once powerful fleets. The human ships simply hovered at the edges of the battlefield, their weapons powered down, waiting. It was an eerie stillness that sent chills down the spines of both the Zorathi and Vanar leaders. It was as if the humans were biding their time, watching, waiting for something more. Then the humans made their next move. Not an attack, but an offer. A broadcast went out to the remaining command structures of both the Zorathi and Vanar factions. It was not a message of surrender, but a simple invitation. You are welcome to meet. We will talk, but only on our terms. For the first time, Both the Zorathi and Vener found themselves facing the reality that they were no longer the decision-makers of the galaxy. No longer were they the ones who dictated the terms of war. The humans had made it clear. The old order was gone, and with it, the old ways of doing things. The Zorathi commanders, whose very identity had been built on aggression and dominance, were left at a loss. There was no honor in surrendering to an unknown force, but the reality of their situation could not be denied. They had lost nearly everything in the battle. The Vener, known for their precision and calculated strategies, were similarly stunned. They had always prided themselves on their ability to outthink their enemies, but this human force wasn't just outthinking them. They were operating on a level of efficiency that defied logic. In the face of such overwhelming power, there was no recourse but to listen. Within hours, a delegation from both factions was sent to meet with the humans. The Zorathi and Vener leaders, still clinging to the belief that they could somehow turn the tide, approached cautiously. The human ships, their designs still inscrutable, hung like sentinels over the neutral zone where the meeting would take place. What the leaders of the Zorathi and Vener did not realize, however, was that the humans were not interested in negotiations. The humans were not there to broker peace. They were there to reshape the galaxy. The message that had been broadcast was not a plea for diplomacy. It was an announcement that the rules had changed, and those who wished to survive would have to adapt. As the representatives from both factions approached the meeting zone, they could feel the weight of the situation. The humans were not desperate. They were not seeking alliances. They were offering the galaxy a chance to rebuild, to evolve. And in the face of such certainty, there was no question left to ask. The turning point had arrived, and with it the realization that the war was over, not because of force, but because the galaxy had just been shown a new path forward, one that neither the Zorathi nor Vener could have predicted, a path that would require them to adapt or perish. The meeting between the humans, the Zorathi, and the Vener was set to take place in a neutral zone, a barren region of space far from the conflict. The Zorathi and Vener arrived, each delegation guarded, uncertain, and wary. The tension was palpable. It was not just a meeting of war leaders, but the meeting between civilizations that had dominated the galaxy for eons, and a force they couldn't even comprehend. The human fleet loomed just beyond the designated meeting space. Their ships, sleek and silent, seemed to pulse with an unsettling calmness. The Zorathi and Vener representatives were escorted to a central location within a vast, floating space station, a place that, despite its technological sophistication, felt almost primitive compared to the unyielding might of the human ships. The representatives entered a massive chamber, the walls glowing softly with an eerie, unnatural light. At the center of the room, human figures stood, calm and composed. They weren't warriors, nor were they generals. These were figures who exuded a quiet authority, their presence far more unsettling than the grandiose displays of power both the Zorathi and Vener were accustomed to. The humans were waiting. There were no speeches, no formalities. The message was clear. They didn't need to prove their power any longer. It had been demonstrated. It had been accepted. The Zorathi delegation, led by Commander Zorak, was the first to speak. His voice was tinged with frustration and disbelief, but also, beneath the anger, an undercurrent of fear. "You have destroyed us. You have shattered our fleets. What is it you want from us now?" His words were sharp, but there was no mistaking the panic in his eyes. Zorak, a warrior to the core, had never known what it was like to be truly helpless. Until now. The human representative, a figure named Alaran, stepped forward. His gaze was direct, unflinching. "We want nothing from you." Alaran replied calmly, "We are not here to conquer. We are here to end this." He gestured to the fractured holographic representations of the galaxy that hovered around them. "You have been at war for millennia. The endless cycles of violence and destruction have brought only death and decay. It ends now. This is your reckoning, your opportunity to evolve." The silence that followed was deafening. The Zorathi, whose identity had been built upon conquest and dominance, found the humans' words not just perplexing but humiliating. They had expected to hear threats or demands, a show of force. But what they were confronted with was something much more unsettling. An offer of change, a choice to rebuild, but only on humanity's terms. The Vynar delegation, led by High Commander Olin, was less vocal but equally troubled. The Vynar were a people of strategy, precision, and intellect, and they had always believed that they could outthink any enemy. But this was different. How could they possibly outthink an enemy who was simply beyond the game they had been playing for so long? Olin, his face a mask of stern contemplation, finally spoke. And if we refuse? If we choose to continue the war? His voice held the weight of a lifetime spent fighting, of billions of lives lost, and yet, in this moment, his words felt empty. Alaran's expression remained unchanged. You won't. Not because you can't, but because you will realize that continuing this war will only lead to your extinction. We will give you the opportunity to rebuild, to find another way to exist in the galaxy. But the old path is closed. The statement landed like a hammer blow, and for the first time, both the Zorathi and Vynar understood the gravity of their situation. They were not merely being offered a ceasefire or an alliance. They were being forced to choose between continuing down the path of destruction or stepping into an entirely new way of life, one in which their old power structures would no longer matter. Take your time, Alaran continued, but know this, the galaxy will change, and those who do not change with it will be left behind. And so, in that moment, the reckoning began. The old powers of the galaxy, once dominant and sure of themselves, now faced a choice that could shape the future of all life in the galaxy. But would they be able to let go of the past? Would they embrace the opportunity for change? Or would they fight to preserve what was left of their crumbling empires? For several days, the galaxy held its breath. The representatives of the Zorathi and Vynar returned to their home systems, each carrying the weight of the human's message. There was no immediate answer, no grand speeches, just silence. But beneath that silence, deep currents of uncertainty and fear ran through the core of both civilizations. They had fought each other for eons, each believing their way was the only way to exist in the galaxy. Now, both races were being asked to rethink everything. The Zorathi, whose entire civilization had been built on conquest, felt the sharpest sting. To surrender their military superiority, to embrace peace, was anathema to everything they had ever known. Zorak, still reeling from the events of the meeting, gathered the last of his military council in a secret chamber aboard the dread Revenant. His people, their pride broken, looked to him for leadership. They needed him to make a decision. But how could he? The very core of Zorathi identity was wrapped in strength, dominance, and the unrelenting march of war. To submit to the humans' vision was not just a tactical retreat. It was the death of everything the Zorathi had ever stood for. We are warriors, not farmers, Zorak growled, slamming his fist onto the holographic table. How can we survive without the strength to crush our enemies? We cannot allow them to dictate the future of our people. One of his generals, a young officer named Valora, spoke up cautiously. And what if we don't have a choice, Commander? What if the humans are more powerful than we imagined? They didn't just defeat us. They showed us that they can end us whenever they wish. If we continue this war, it's not just our armies that will fall. It will be our people. The words hit Zorak harder than he would admit. He had always been proud of his power, but in that moment, he realized that what the humans had done wasn't just about defeating an army. It was about transforming the galaxy, stripping away the old ways, and forcing a future where the Zorathi, as they were, had no place. Across the galaxy, in the pristine halls of the Vynar capital, High Commander Olin wrestled with similar thoughts. The Vynar were not as committed to war as the Zorathi, but their pride lay in their intellect, their strategic brilliance. To submit to a force that had shown no interest in diplomacy or negotiation, but only in change, felt like surrendering to the unknown. Olin stood in front of a large viewing window, staring out at the stars, contemplating the words of Aileron. The old path is closed. He muttered to himself. How could an entire civilization, one built on precision and order, adjust to a future where those traits would no longer be enough? The Venair had always been superior in technology, but the humans didn't even need to match them on that front. They fought with a different kind of superiority, one that transcended the very concept of battle. The humans offer us peace, yes, Olin said to his advisors, but is it peace that is truly ours, or are we simply being handed a new order to follow? There was a long pause in the room as his advisors exchanged glances. The idea of submitting to humanity's vision felt too alien to grasp, but the alternative, to resist, to continue their conflict, seemed equally impossible. A war against the humans could only end in annihilation, not just for the Venair, but for everyone in the galaxy. The council was divided, and Olin was caught in the middle of a war within his own mind. He had long believed that the Venair were the future of the galaxy, that intellect and precision were all that mattered. But what if that had been wrong? What if the future was no longer about war, but about something altogether different? The decision had to come soon. Both factions were on the verge of collapse, their war-torn fleets still reeling from the battles with the humans. Would they continue down the path of destruction, or would they risk everything to embrace a future dictated by those who had shown them the true meaning of power? The choice was now theirs to make. The galaxy waited. The decision had been made. It wasn't unanimous, and it wasn't easy, but both the Zorathi and Venair had come to realize that the galaxy they once knew was gone. The humans had shown them the fragility of their power, the truth that their long-standing empires could crumble in an instant. There was no denying it any longer. The old ways were over. On the day of the summit, representatives from both the Zorathi and Venair gathered in the neutral zone once more. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air as the leaders filed into the meeting hall. This time, the humans were not just standing in silence, waiting for their adversaries to speak. They had brought something different to the table. A vision. A plan. Aileron, the human envoy who had become the face of their movement, stood before the gathered leaders with a calm that was unnerving. His eyes scanned across the room, taking in the broken and weary figures of the Zorathi and Venair commanders. He could feel the tension, the reluctance, but he also knew that this moment, this meeting, would define the galaxy's future. "Welcome," Aileron began, his voice echoing softly in the chamber. "You have come here to decide whether you will be part of a new era, or if you will fade into the ashes of history. The choice is yours." Zorak, the leader of the Zorathi, stood with a steely gaze. His people had always fought to the last breath, but the toll of the war had been devastating. His once mighty fleet was in ruins, and his people were scattered across their homeworld, their strength reduced to nothing. Even now, as he looked at the humans, he knew the inevitable. His people had no future in war. It was time to adapt. "We will abide by your terms," Zorak said, his voice low but resolute. The words were hard to say, but they were true. "But do not mistake our surrender for weakness. Our people will rebuild, but we will do so in a new way." The Venair, who had been quiet throughout the proceedings, exchanged glances. High Commander Olin, ever the strategist, stepped forward. His people were known for their intelligence and precision, but they too had seen the futility in further resistance. The humans' power was not just technological, it was psychological. It was a force of nature that reshaped everything in its path. The Venair could not outthink it. They could only choose to be a part of it. "We also accept your offer," Olin said. "The war ends today, not because we have been defeated, but because we understand that the future lies in change, not in endless destruction. The old ways are finished." Aileron nodded, his face unreadable. "Then it is done. The galaxy has been given a second chance. You will rebuild, not as conquerors, but as partners in a new order." The days of endless war are over. The galaxy must evolve, or it will perish. For a moment, there was silence. The Zorathi and Vener exchanged looks, their once impervious pride now tempered with humility. A new era had begun, one that they had not chosen but were forced to accept. The humans had not come as conquerors, but as catalysts of change, the force that had driven them to see the truth of their existence. As the meeting concluded, both delegations began the process of forging a new path. The remnants of their fleets would be used to build a new Galactic Council, one where every race, not just the Zorathi and Venar, would have a voice. The galaxy would be restructured, with new technologies and new ideologies emerging. And humanity, once thought of as a primitive species, had now become the guiding force of this new age. The galaxy, shaped by war for millennia, would now be defined by cooperation, evolution, and a new way forward. The humans had ended the war in a single day, not with the destruction of their enemies, but with the creation of a new order. And as the Zorathi and Vener leaders walked away from the meeting hall, they knew that this was only the beginning. The galaxy had been forever changed.